From the Oklahoma newsroom, you're watching the Press Row. I'm Jenni Carlson, about to be joined remotely by Barry Tramel. Lots to talk about basketball-wise. And Barry, you're joining us today from?
The shadow of Disneyland.
Very nice. Very nice.
Unfortunately, the room, they gave me a city view, which there's not much city. It's just sprawling suburbia. But I guess the other side of the hotel has the Disney view.
So you have not seen any large Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse impersonators running around your hotel just yet, I suppose?
No, but driving to the arena, you pass by part of the park, and you see some of the big rides, I guess, that you can see from the outside. And you see about 9,000 people on the streets walking to the theme park. So they seem to be making a profit at Disneyland. I think they're going to make it.
I think so. Yeah, for sure. Well, Barry, you're in Anaheim, where later today, we're talking on Thursday morning, but later today, the Sooners will play their Sweet 16 game there in Anaheim, and 6:30 or so Oklahoma time tip. But you had a chance to write about and catch up with Kadeem Lattin. Obviously, we know around here, but his granddad, David Lattin, a member of the Texas Western basketball team, the Glory Road team, as people now know them, 50th anniversary. Barry, just really neat convergence of timing and obviously the Lattin family. Talk a little bit about the story, and what did you learn from all of this? Because you're a history guy, so you obviously know a lot about Texas Western, Don Haskins, and just the history that lies there.
Well, you know what? I actually didn't learn a ton because it is one of my favorite subjects, and I loved Don Haskins. Got to know him late in life, and was down in El Paso with him once for 2 days, and he got to where he'd call me and talk OSU basketball. So I didn't learn a lot. What I had forgotten, I actually tip of the cap to Jackie O. You reminded me that Mo Iba was his assistant, and Mo was in Stillwater yesterday, and you chatted with Mo for me. So that was, I'd forgotten all about that. So that was great. But what I learned about the Lattin relationship, Kadeem is he's not hesitant to talk about it, but it's not really his favorite subject. He doesn't really like to expound on it. I think he's a little sheepish. He wants to make his own way. His granddad, Big Daddy, David Lattin, is a lot more, he's a lot more fired up about the subject, fired up about his grandson. He's talks a little bit crazy when he talks about Kadeem and how good he could be. Wants him to lead the NCAA in rebounding and block shots.
Wow.
And finish in the top 20 in scoring. So, he wants him to be Lou Alcindor. So, Kadeem Lattin is a wonderful player and incredibly valuable to the Sooners. He's not now or never will be Lou Alcindor, but I learned a lot about, I think, Kadeem Lattin's. He sort of wants to make his own way, wants to create his own path in this March Madness legacy.
Well, and Barry, I think what you say, when you talk about that, I can totally get, because as you mentioned, I did have a chance to talk to Mo Iba. He was in attendance at the introductory event for Brad Underwood as the new Oklahoma State basketball coach, which we'll talk about all that here in just a second. But, he brought up the fact that, David Lattin, fantastic player. They knew he was a really skilled player, but he was only a sophomore on that Glory Road team. And Mo Iba told me that they really didn't know just how much they would get out of David Lattin that season that they won the championship. And then, obviously the impact of that game, that all-black starting lineup for Texas Western, playing an all-white Kentucky starting lineup. And, Mo Iba told me that they didn't think about that really as the season went on. It wasn't really something that they were focused on, but clearly they understood the impact that had, not only that at that point, but more long-term, not just on basketball either, Barry. I mean, you talk about the impact of Glory Road. You're not just talking on sports and college basketball. The implications are huge. So I could see why Kadeem Lattin is maybe trying to say, hey, I'm proud of that, but I got to do my own thing. I mean, the implications of that situation, like I said, just dramatic across the board.
When Texas Western beat Kentucky in Cole Fieldhouse, College Park, Maryland, March 19th, 1966, the Southwest Conference had not been integrated athletically. There were some black athletes on some campuses, but the football color line was broken in 1966 by Jerry Levias at SMU. That would have been the fall of 66. So we're talking about a landscape and a culture that's foreign to all of us. Mm-hmm. We can't even comprehend that, the SEC and the SWC were completely void of black players. Oklahoma and Oklahoma State had integrated in the late 50s. Some of the northern schools in the Big Ten, Iowa State, Kansas, earlier than that. But down in the southern part of the country, major college sports were still segregated. And that really began to change after 1966. And was Texas Western the only reason? No. But was it a major reason? Yes. So it was an historical game. I said it's not the biggest game in college basketball history, but it may have been the most important game in college basketball history. And now 50 years later, one of the principals, mm-hmm. Big Daddy Lattin, his grandson, has a chance to go to the same Final Four that David Lattin went to.
Yeah, and Barry, I think what you said about the foreign landscape, you talked to Christian James in your story about this, and he says he's talked to David Lattin. I'm sure just the same way Kadeem has, heard the stories over the years, and Christian James essentially saying, I can't hardly believe some of the things that David Lattin told me about the situations, the experiences that they went through. So totally changed the sports landscape, which, sometimes sports is behind in social change, but a lot of times it's ahead of the curve. And in this case, I think it helped lead the curve, helped lead that change to integration, not only in sports, but in classrooms and colleges and schools in ways that weren't necessarily there before. Hey, you're watching The Press Row. I'm Jenni here with Barry. It's all basketball today. And as I mentioned before, Brad Underwood is a big topic of conversation around here as he's the new men's basketball coach at Oklahoma State. Barry, they had a big celebration to introduce him on Wednesday afternoon, opened up Gallagher-Iba, had everything on the floor, invited the public in. A couple thousand people showed up, which, frankly, considering the crowds at the end of this last season, that's a pretty good number. What did you come away from the event, the press conference? What was your impression of Underwood and just this, really turn of the leaf in Cowboy basketball?
Well, I thought Brad Underwood punched all the right buttons, said all the right things, and that makes him no different than any other coach that's ever been hired with a little bit of a clue. Mm-hmm. Travis Ford did the same thing. However, I think it's more believable with Brad Underwood. When you hire a Travis Ford with the Kentucky roots, with the bluegrass background, when he talks about Oklahoma State tradition and culture, it's a little bit learned and it's a little bit forced. That he respects it, but it's not something that he's lived. A guy that grew up in McPherson, Kansas, and played ball at Kansas State for Jack Hartman, a protege of Henry Iba. When he starts talking about the OSU basketball roots and culture, it's he knows what he's talking about. So, I think Travis embraced the OSU tradition and the OSU culture. I don't think that was an issue with him at all. But I don't think Brad Underwood has to embrace it. I think it's a part of him already. Yeah. So to me, that's what, I think makes this such a home run hire.
Yeah, and Barry, I think not just, he talked a ton about OSU, his memories of playing there, his memories of coaching there as an assistant. He spent several years at K-State under Bob Huggins and then Frank Martin. So he coached at Gallagher-Iba in recent years, played there in his playing days. He had recollections of, what that place sounded like and felt like and just the energy that was in that building. So, he spoke from a perspective of knowledge, firsthand knowledge of Oklahoma State, Gallagher-Iba, those sorts of things. But it went beyond that from my perspective, Barry. At one point, Brad Underwood talked about, going around the state, meeting people, shaking hands, kissing babies, doing the whole thing. And he threw out Altus. Barry, on his first, official day on the job, he's throwing around Altus. Next thing he's going to be using my favorite Oklahoma outpost, Goaty Bow, to reference these things. He really did. It felt like it was just, like you said, genuine. You used that word before, but I think he really connected with people I think there may still be some people out there that would like to see an OSU diploma on his wall. That's not going to happen, but he sure sounded and seemed like an OSU type of guy, Barry.
Yeah, he did. The truth of the matter is, you know this better than anybody. I mean, McPherson, Kansas, is a Stillwater type of town. It just doesn't have a major university in it, but it's small town, good sized small town, middle America, and it's a basketball hotbed. OSU's had a player from McPherson under Eddie Sutton, Chad Alexander, in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And, a guy from McPherson, Kansas can talk well and educated about Stillwater, Oklahoma. So I think, Brad Underwood, now he's going to have to be a little bit careful when he talks about going to all the civic clubs and sports banquets and all that kind of thing. He can't do a whole ton of that. His time demands are going to be to where that's not feasible. But just making himself accessible to all the people that he does come in contact will go a long way to winning people over. I think you said this, he's still got to win games.
Yeah.
But, if he wins games, it looks to me like at least the process has begun to get the fans back. I don't know if the fans will ever come back. The truth of the matter is, Gallagher-Iba was expanded too much, 13,611 seats, too many for 21st century college basketball in a place like Stillwater. But I think he can bring the passion and the fire back to Gallagher-Iba, and I think the process has started.
Yeah, and Barry, I don't pretend to know how long it's going to take for Brad Underwood to get the program, regular top, finish, top 4 finish, top 3 finish in the Big 12. I think the pedigree is really good when you talk about being able to win games. But, as you said, I think he has started to win back the fans. Look, he mentioned this, Stephen F. Austin, which had a really strong basketball tradition, even dating back to 50, 60 years ago with their women's team. They had been pretty good before Underwood showed up 3 years ago, but even under his regime, they increased attendance. They went to their conference tournament in an arena that seats 4,500, and to Underwood's estimation, about 4,000 of those people were Stephen F. fans. So they really felt like they connected. Clearly, winning games brings a lot more fans into the fold, but I do think that if you combine some steps in the right directions to winning games, and some of the outreach that Brad Underwood talked about, and that sounds like if you talk to people in his past, if you talk to past bosses that he's worked for, that's just part of who he is. He just really likes to talk to people, meet people. We've talked from time to time about Bill Self and how he just has this gift of making people feel like they're a friend, like he knows them. Some people have different gifts, and it seems like along the line, Brad Underwood has established himself as a guy that relates to people, really likes to be around people, get to know people, make people feel a part. And frankly, right now, as much as anything at Oklahoma State, they need to make fans feel a part. Winning will come, I think, because the track record is there for this guy, but they need to bring people back, make them feel good about their program. I think Wednesday was definitely, like you said, Barry, a good start for that. Hey, you're watching The Press Row. I'm Jenni here with Barry. One more topic of conversation about Oklahoma State basketball. Barry, on Wednesday, Mike Holder talking to media. He obviously spoke during Brad Underwood's introductory press conference, but then spoke to media afterwards on the side and talked about a meeting he had with the Sutton family. Eddie, Sean, Scott, Steve, who's not in coaching, but met with the Suttons, really felt like that was important to go and talk to the Sutton family, as much as anything to say, I'm sorry, to apologize. Barry, you wrote about this the day we found out that Brad Underwood had been hired, his connection to Jack Hartman, who has connections to Coach Henry Iba, who Gallagher-Iba is named after. Just seems like there's a move to really try to unite the past, the history, the heritage with what's going on currently in Cowboy basketball. Good move in your mind?
Well, it's a great move, and it's a humanitarian move. Now, it's also fallen on the sword. I mean, I don't know that Mike Holder has anything to apologize for.
Right.
Mike Holder's not done anything, I don't think, to hurt the status of OSU basketball. Travis Ford had some good times, and then things didn't really work out, and things are where they are. But the Suttons themselves had a hand in this with both Eddie's and Sean's substance abuse problems. So the fan decline started under Sean. It didn't start under Travis Ford. It's accelerated under Ford to distressing levels now. But I first wrote about the empty seats at Gallagher-Ibo when Sean was the coach.
Right.
So I think Holder has fallen on his sword, but it's a good move. And the truth of the matter is, the Suttons never really. I mean, Sean naturally felt disconnected because he'd been the head coach and had the fall from grace. But I think Eddie always felt still connected to OSU. Travis never did anything to disconnect from Eddie. Eddie felt comfortable enough to come to a lot of games when his health was good and would sit on the front row. He was at Gallagher-Iba this season on a couple of occasions. So it's a magnanimous gesture by Holder. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's good just from a Holder-Sutton relationship because, they had a strained relationship in the latter days of Eddie's tenure as the coach. So I think that's very good that just that part seems to getting put back together. And maybe Mike Holder's and part of his message was, hey, I'm sorry that we didn't have a better relationship. So anytime you can get everybody together feeling better, that's a good thing. I do think Mike Holder, if he's apologizing to the Suttons for the shape of the program, he's been a little hard on himself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'm writing a little bit about this for our Friday newspaper, and I totally agree that, Mike Holder had to do what he had to do when it came to both Eddie and Sean as head coach. There are probably people that would argue with me about that and say, oh, no, they could have kept Eddie, they could have kept Sean. There was just no way, though, in my mind. Mike Holder had to do what he had to do in both of those situations. I do think in some ways part of what Mike Holder was apologizing for, and I think part of it was to extend that olive branch to try to make Sean and all of the brothers, although I think it probably is mostly Sean after he was fired by Mike Holder, make him feel like he could come back at any point just like his dad. But I think as much as anything, Mike Holder sat in that arena this last year, saw how it had changed, saw how the program had just devolved from those wonderful days that he even admitted. He said, I played hooky from things just to make sure I could get to basketball games back in the day. I wanted to be a part of that feeling. And so I think he felt a sense of responsibility. He hired Travis Ford. He didn't fire him maybe a couple years ago when, the contract just didn't allow it. He had given him that 10-year deal. I think he sort of thought, I saw where it was, I saw what it could be, and now it's this. And I feel like I have at least some part in this. Barry, I agree with you. I don't know if it's definitely not 100% of his fault in any form or fashion, but still the opportunity, for him to go and sit down with the Suttons, and as you said, Eddie comes back. But what if next season we see Eddie and Sean, and occasionally maybe Scott even finds a way to come back to a game? To me, that would speak volumes to a lot of Oklahoma State fans that have been really put off by sort of the Sutton era being, they may feel, left in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, to me, the key Sutton in all this is Sean. Mm-hmm. Scott, has always been a loyal soldier, proud alum, good ambassadors coaching at Oral Roberts. Eddie's never felt disrespected, but clearly Sean, there was a divide because of the way he left, his hard feelings, and then his admission that, hey, I had a problem. If Sean can get back in the good graces, I'll give you a crazy scenario would be if Sean could ever come back to the program in some capacity.
Right.
He's still a good basketball coach, a good basketball mind. He was an effective recruiter, all kinds of things. I'm not saying that it works for a Brad Underwood hire for his staff, but at some point, Sean Sutton back in Stillwater would be a great, great finish to this story.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's so far-fetched. I mean, clearly Brad Underwood wants to get his people in there, and he's not going to, Mike Holder even said, I'm not going to try to influence anybody that Brad Underwood hires for his staff. He's clearly got some guys that and I'm sure he wants to bring in. But, James Dickey remains. He's now holding that interim tag, or held that interim tag before Brad Underwood was hired. It was a short-lived thing, but he's on a 3-year contract, so he's still got 1 year left. Even if he doesn't end up getting a spot on the basketball staff, Mike Holder said, hey, there's going to be a spot for James Dickey. We'll put him somewhere. We'll plug him in. He's so respected. We'll find a spot in the athletic department for him. But, when you look around, Barry, there's all sorts of possibilities and jobs. You're looking at, director of basketball ops, or if not a full-fledged assistant. I don't think it's too crazy to think that, Sean Sutton and Brad Underwood might be talking about, could something work out here? I'm not saying it will, but I wouldn't be totally surprised if, when Brad Underwood announces his staff, probably in the coming week or so, if Sean Sutton maybe doesn't have a spot on that, I think he'll at least be looked at by Brad Underwood before he names that staff. Hey, be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.